Hello there, welcome to the channel. My name is Kain, and in today's video I'll be teaching you how to play Akali. Now, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and check out my personal coaching service in the description down below. Now, in order to avoid making this video 2 hours long, let's get on with it. First thing you need to understand if you want to main Akali is her champion identity. While Akali offers many specific attributes, she mainly has 6 key fundamentals that you need to be aware of. Number 1, Akali is a mid-game champion, meaning she's at her strongest around 15 to 30 minutes in the game. Now, this specifically means that in the early lane phase, it's okay to sit back and scale until you have your level 6 or maybe your first item, etc. However, on the other hand, it also means that in the mid game, we really need to be proactive and try to end the game as quickly as possible. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like Akali scales that badly. It's just that almost in every game, the enemy will have like one champion that scales better than Akali, making it just not that easy for you to play in the late game. So it's basically a must to end the game as quickly as possible. Number 2, Akali is a snowball-oriented champion, meaning that once you get a lead, you become so strong that it's very easy to take over the game and 1v9. This also means that if you don't have a lead, the game becomes a lot harder for you. Additionally, if you have a lead and you fail to extend that lead because you die all the time, for example, you will be useless for the rest of the game. Now, being a snowbally champion means that if you pick up an early kill at level 3, for example, or level 6, Akali will already be very strong from that moment, so already in the early game, and she doesn't have to wait until the mid game to start dominating the game. So while Akali can play safe in the early game and spike in the mid game, her snowballing nature allows her to be very strong in the early game as well, if she manages to pick up a kill early on in the game. So basically, Akali is a mid-game champion, but due to her snowballing nature, she can also be a strong early-game champion as well. Number 3. Akali is energy reliant, as her spells will cost energy to use them. Now, while her energy pool always stays the same, the more points you put in Akali's Q ability, the less energy it will cost to use this ability. This means that the energy problem is mainly a problem in the early stages of the game, and that of course limits you in your early trading and wave clear. However, once you have some points in your queue, you definitely can start becoming like a lot less energy reliant. So being energy reliant as Akali means that in the early lane phase, you can't be that aggressive as you won't be able to use your Q a lot for trading and for wave clear. Number 4, Akali is a very mobile champion. Now let's go over it. So her passive gives her movement speed, her W gives her movement speed, her E is a dash, and if you hit it on the target, you can recast it to get another dash. And her ultimate also has 2 dashes. So I think it's fair to say that Akali is a very mobile champion. This means that Akali is very good versus immobile enemy champions, such as a Victor or a Jinx, for example, as those champions can't stop you from all-inning them. Additionally, being mobile makes it easier to escape or even outplay ganks, for example, and gives you extra opportunities, such as not using Flash as a summoner spell, but instead taking something like Ignite and Teleport, for example. Now don't worry, I'll go over the summoner spells in depth later in this guide. Fundamental number 5, Akali is an assassin, meaning that she has a lot of burst damage, so she likes to one-shot enemies. So Akali is a very good pick versus an enemy team comp with many low maximum HP squishy champions, such as ADCs, mages, or even other assassins. However, this also means that Akali isn't that good of a pick into tanky team comps. Now, I would say with the correct runes and builds, Akali can still be good into tanky team comps, but she is definitely better into squishy team comps. And last but not least, number 6, Akali is relatively reliant on her ultimate. Now, while Akali can deal tons of damage with her non-ultimate abilities like with her Q and her E, her ultimate is still the main tool that allows her to run people down, execute enemies, and deal an insane amount of AoE damage in those teamfights. Now, in-game, this translates to trying to hold on to your ultimate for Dragon or Baron fights rather than using your ultimate to pick someone off 1 minute before a Baron. So it's very important to sync up your item power spikes with your ultimate cooldown and the objective timers. Okay, let's take a look at Akali, her abilities. Let's start with her passive. Assassin's Mark. So basically what is Akali's passive? Whenever she hits an ability, you will see this circle around your opponent. If you walk outside of the circle, now you have gained an empowered auto attack. So your next auto attack will be empowered, it will deal extra magic damage to your opponent, and it will give you extra range. Look at my range right now, and now if I walk outside of this circle after hitting an ability, my range right now is a lot bigger. Right? And it is going to become smaller here again after it has run out. Now what's also important, so not only do I get extra damage and extra range on this attack here, but I will also gain movement speed if I walk towards the circle and if I walk out of the circle towards my opponent. So let me show you. Look at my movement speed here. If I walk towards the circle, I get movement speed increased. And if I walk back to the enemy champion, I also get increased movement speed. So that's something very important for you to know. So the moment you hit a champion and you walk towards the edges of the circle, you get increased movement speed. And then if you walk to your opponent, you also get increased movement speed. So very, very important. Now let's take a look at our W, or let's take a look at our Q, 5-point strike. Akali slings kunai in an arc, dealing magic damage and slowing enemies at the tip by 50% for half a second. So very simple. We're going to throw kunai on the ground, and if we hit a champion with that, no matter where he stands in front of us, we will deal damage onto him. Very, very simple. Now, if we hit our opponent at the edges here, he will be slowed for half a second for 50%, which is very, very useful. And then something with your passive. So like I said, typically you do like your Q, you walk out of it and you get your passive, right? And now you can walk up and deal damage. Well, there is this Easter egg, I would call it, as Akali. It's not very useful, but I want to share it with you guys. Where you instantly proc the circle, where you instantly walk out of the circle by not walking. You can just stand still and you instantly proc it just because you perfectly time your Q max range. So it's here, look, I didn't have to walk back. I just stand still and I do proc my empowered auto attack instantly. This only works on the blue side of the map and here as well. It also works if you stand here, but it doesn't work if you stand here or if you stand here. So it only works on the bottom side of the map and the blue side of the map. Now, is it very useful? No, because yeah, it's very easy if you try to do max range to just barely hit your opponent. So it's better to walk a little bit in range to the point where you're like sure that you're going to hit him, and then you can always just walk a little bit back and hit your opponent anyway. I think that's a lot more consistent. Now let's take a look at our Shroud. Twilight Shroud, and it's very simple. You drop a shroud, smoke on the map. If you go into the smoke, you become invisible. Right. Also very, very important with this is that the moment you press it, you get increased movement speed, decaying again. So decaying over 2 seconds here. So the moment you press it, you become invisible and you get increased movement speed for 2 seconds. Now, something you want to know as well is it will increase your maximum energy. So when you play Akali, you always have 200 energy. Whether you're level 1 or level 18, you always have 200 energy. However, if you press your W, this goes up to 300, which is very important for trading. So if I put this off here, so I want to trade with my opponent and now I'm out of energy. So I press my W, I get 100 extra energy and I can start trading again with my opponent, which is very, very useful. So it's also a good training tool on top of just being an invisible tool. So when you press it, you get movement speed, you become invisible, and you get extra energy to trade with your opponent. Now, some things that I want to mention. If you press your W, look, it's going to move towards enemies. So it expands and moves towards enemies. And the circle in the middle of it becomes wider. So if you press it and you just stand still here, knowing it's going to move here, you are going to become visible. So be aware of that, you have to move. Also, there are certain abilities that can make you visible, even though you're invisible right now. For example, if you are in your Shroud and you're invisible and LeBlanc hits you with an E, you become visible. Kai'Sa, for example, as well can make you visible. So some champions can make you visible, which is a very big disadvantage to play against them. So keep that in mind as well. Now, with that being said, something else that you need to take into account with your W is if you are invisible, but you look to attack your opponent and cancel it, you become visible. You might have seen there that for a very brief moment I became visible. That's because I look to attack somebody like a minion or a champion. And even if I cancel that attack, even if I don't do the attack, I just cancel it, I also become visible, which is of course not ideal. So keep that in mind. And then last but not least about the invisibility here. If you Shroud under a turret, you will be visible for enemies and for the turret, so you cannot dodge turret shots with your Shroud. And you will also be visible in your Shroud underneath the turret, so keep that in mind. Next up are E. The Shuriken Flip, very simple. Whether it's a minion, a dragon, a jungle camp, or an enemy champion, if I press my E, I will dash backwards automatically and I will hit a Shuriken onto the enemy. So I press E, I dash backwards, hit the E, and now I can choose to recast it and go back to that E and deal damage. I deal damage when I hit it, but I deal an insane amount of damage if I recast it and then hit my opponent. I will deal an insane amount of damage on the recast of the E. Now, the E can be used, you can also just use it in lane for free to get closer to your opponent, for example. Like, he's not in Q range, maybe I can just E and then Q. So it's used as a gap closer. It is also used to go over walls, like this, for example. So there's a lot you can do with this, actually. And then, also very important, you can attach it to your smoke. So if I do W and I E, we're going to see here, I can go back to the smoke. So that's also very, very useful. Keep in mind, it will always go to the furthest point of the smoke. So if I land my E here, it's not going to go here, it's going to go here. Look, it doesn't attach to this, it attaches to the furthest part of the smoke. So that's also important. Where I throw E, it's not going to hit here, it's going to hit there. And now I go back all the way there. So keep that in mind. And then last but not least, if you W and you E onto it, it will stay. Look, your shroud will move and this part will stay a little bit longer. So in theory, you could do your E, wait until it almost expires here. Now do E, and this little bit of smoke will still be here, and now I can cast it. So that's also something interesting about the E. Now, that's everything about the E. Let's move on to the ultimate. Perfect execution. Well, Akali's ultimate is 2 parts. One, a point and click part. I cannot use it on minions. I cannot use it on anything else than champions. I have to activate it on champions. Okay, what is it? Well, I can leap over a champion and it deals magic damage. Now I have another dash that has more range even, and I can do it wherever I want. So the first part, I need to do it on a champion and I will dash over them. The second part is a dash and I can choose where I do it. I don't have to do it on champions or minions, I can do it wherever I want. Whereas the first part, I can only do it on champions. Also something significant with the first part of your ultimate is just, 1, you're gonna leap, and 2, it's only magic damage, nothing special. But the second part here will deal damage based on the enemy's missing health. So it's like a Veigar ultimate, for example. It's an execute. The lower the enemies are, the more damage the second dash of your ultimate will deal. So that's very important to know. So for example, if you R somebody, and now you don't want to instantly R2 if they're like full HP, instead you want to trade a little bit with them, like get them a little bit low, and now you want to R because it will deal more damage the lower you are. So you typically want to deal some damage to them before you do the second part of your ultimate. And then also something important maybe to know is your first part of your ultimate will deal damage to everyone who you dash through. So I deal damage to everyone, and then of course the second one also deals damage through everyone. But that's it for Akali abilities. There is obviously a lot more to it. We're going to look at it in the combo section. But for now, this is it. Alright, let's take a look at the different Akali summoner spell setups. There's mainly 3 setups you can consistently go. The first one being the Ignite Flash combo. I like the Ignite Flash combo if I'm in a fistfight lane, for example when I'm playing versus a Sylas, because Ignite might make the difference in these early fights. Also, when I'm having an easy matchup, you could also go Ignite, because in general Ignite helps you to snowball, and that's exactly what you want when you're playing Akali. And last but not least, I like to go Ignite if the enemies have lots of healing champions like Sylas mid and Aatrox top, because Ignite applies grievous wounds, and that way I don't have to build Morellonomicon, which I think is a bad item on Akali. As for the second summoner spell setup, we have the Teleport Flash combo. Whenever you're in a lane where you can't kill your lane opponent in the early game, or the lane is generally not that easy for you, for example when you play into an Orianna like pre-level 6, just go teleport and scale. Teleport allows you to have a good lane phase, and it's also great in the mid game to be able to side lane and still join teamfights regularly. Additionally, I also love teleport to make teleport plays starting from minute 10, because Akali is great at making teleport plays, for example in the bot lane, and then getting a double kill. And that's what brings me to the third and last summoner spell setup, the Ignite and Teleport combo. Now personally I love this combo as it gives me the best of both worlds. Snowball potential with the Ignite, and then Teleport allows you to have a good early lane, making side laning easier and giving you the opportunity to make teleport plays. Now you can go this combo on Akali, because as Akali you don't really rely that much on Flash as she already has so many dashes and safety tools herself. However, this setup is quite greedy, and I only go it when I'm facing a melee having enemy team comp. Because even if you have a lot of dashes, it might be hard to play into a full ranged enemy team comp. So if they have something like an Ahri mid lane, an Ashe and Vel'Koz bot lane, I would definitely not go Ignite Teleport, I would probably just go Ignite Flash or Teleport Flash. Alright, so now let's take a look at the runes that we could be going onto Akali. And it's actually, Akali is one of the most simple champions to build like runes on because the runes are very, very simple. So let's start with the standard rune page. We're going to go into the domination tree here because we want to snowball as Akali. That's one of her fundamentals. She is a mid-game champion. She can already be strong from the early game, but it depends on how hard she snowballs. So if you want to snowball, you want to be taking aggressive runes such as electrocute, and then you would pair it up. You would take something like this, and this is going to be your standard Akali rune setup, specifically in the mid lane as well. So if you're playing Akali into a squishy or champions that you can kill, and you want to accelerate the game, you want to snowball, this is the go-to setup that you want to go on Akali. And there are a couple of things you could switch up here, not that many though. So here, I wouldn't change anything, but then here, all the way down here, you could swap out Ultimate Hunter for Relentless Hunter, which will give you more out of combat movement speed, which is useful to roam and move onto the map. But so you could argue to take this if you don't have teleport in the mid game, then this might be very useful to like use to walk quicker on the map. But I'm not a big fan of it. I'm not a big fan of it, and I'm going to talk about it in just a bit. And then Treasure Hunter is also, this is for even more snowballing, so you could definitely go this. But I still am not a big fan of it because I just love Ultimate Hunter that much. And the reason for it is very simple. After some nerfs, Akali's cooldown right now on her ultimate is quite long, and Ultimate Hunter is going to make the cooldown on her ultimate a lot shorter. And since one of her 6 fundamentals is that she's quite ultimate reliant, we want to have that ultimate up as much as possible. Therefore, I am a very big fan of Ultimate Hunter. And then for the secondary tree here, there's not too much you can change. Overgrowth is super good on Akali. And Second Wind is what you're typically going to take. And it's very simple. As Akali, in a majority of the matchups, you're going to want to you're going to play into range matchups into the mid lane. And then they're going to poke you a lot, so you're going to need a lot of sustain. And Second Wind is very good against poking champions, and so you will sustain a lot more. However, if you play versus more burst matchups, like fistfight matchups, let's say you play versus something like a Silas or a Fizz, then bone plating is a lot better because those champions don't want to poke you, they want to all-in you, and then bone plating is just better. It will shield you from that burst damage that they have. Other than that, I wouldn't switch up anything here. Theoretically, you could go into the sorcery tree and take something like this, but I don't know, I feel like this is always going to be best. Overgrowth makes you skill so well. Extra help in lane is always nice because you do want to snowball, and then this is the best setup, I believe, in poke matchups and this in burst matchups. Now, for the mini runes here, you could go health scaling or you could go flat health. And it depends on the matchup. If you just want to scale or if you can't really kill your opponent, you can go health scaling. Flat health is great if you're in very fistfight heavy matchups like a Silas again, or an Irelia in the mid lane, or a Fizz. Like champions that it's going to be inevitable for you to fight them. Like at some point you're going to fight them in the early game. And then having that extra health in the early game might actually make you live and might be the difference maker in you killing them and you just surviving. So it is actually quite useful to have this. But then again, I also like the health scaling. It makes you a little bit tankier towards those mid-game and late-game team fights. So I always like this, but I would go this in like 80% of my games, but if I can't, if I'm really in a lane where there's going to be a lot of fist fighting like a Silas matchup, I would go the flat health. That's it for the standard rune page. This is the rune page that you should take in probably 70 or 80% of your games. And then if you're playing into specific matchups, we can go into the Conqueror tree. And then, for example, we could go Conqueror if you play versus more tanky champions in the mid lane. Think of something like a Galio, for example. And then we have actually a lot of options here. But this is going to be, for example, like a standard one. So if you play versus tanky champions, Conqueror is going to be great. Now, I wouldn't go Conqueror necessarily if I'm only playing versus Galio and then the rest of their team is not that tanky and range. Then I would still go Electrocute. But I feel like Conqueror is really good if they have more than one tanky champion and more than one melee champion. For example, maybe they have a set top in the Mumu jungle, a Galio mid. I think then Conqueror is pretty good, and then I would go Conqueror. Now with Conqueror, I typically go Presence of Mind. It helps you out a lot with the early energy problems. Again, Akali is energy reliant in the early lane phase, so then Presence of Mind is going to help us with that fundamental. And then here we have actually multiple options. I like Legend Haste. I think it's turbo broken and it's also going to help you with your ultimate cooldown as well, which is again quite a big issue on Akali. So I like to have the Legend Haste then to get the ability haste. But you could also go Legend Alacrity, which is something I've been experimenting with, and I like it. It's going to give you extra attack speed, and you might think, well, do I need extra attack speed on Akali? Well, not really, but it's really useful because the extra attack speed will also work, of course, on your empowered auto attack. So you will be able to get off your empowered auto attacks a lot quicker with this, and I kind of like it. But generally speaking, I think Legend Haste is the best, and then with Legend Alacrity, I'm basically experimenting a bit, but I'm kind of liking it so far. But this would be the standard so far. And then here underneath, there's multiple options you have. You could literally go all three of those. It's at this point, I feel like personal preference. I personally like to go a lot of cut down. I feel like it's really useful because once you play versus those tankier team comps, you are going to be facing enemies like tanks. And tanks are typically like very healthy for a long time. So they're typically going to be very long above 60% health. So then you're going to deal increased damage to them. And I feel like that's a great stat to have. On the other hand, then coup de grace. And this is where you're going to deal more damage to people who are below 40%. Which I think is a lot better against squishies and not necessarily against tanks. But you could still go it against tanks. I don't think it's that bad. And then here, Last Stand is going to give you increased damage the lower you get. And I think that's also fine against tanks. Because typically if you play against champions like Amumu, Galio, Set, you're going to be in fistfights. And you're going to be in fights where you're going to get CC'd, you're going to get stunned, you're going to get damaged, and you're going to end up being low. So you're definitely going to be able to use the extra damage that you get from Last Stand. So if I go to Conqueror page, I either choose between Cut Down and Last Stand. I like both of them, and then Coup de Grace I wouldn't necessarily go when I go Conqueror. So it's one of these two. It's personal preference at this point, but personally I'm liking Cut Down a little bit more. I feel like I have a little bit more value from Cut Down rather than Last Stand. And then for the secondary runes, it's just the same. Again, we just go Overgrowth with Second Wind against Poke and Bone Plating into Burst. But that's it. There's nothing different here. And then again, the flat and the scaling health is completely fine. You can, like again, flat health against early fistfight matchups, scaling health into more easier matchups where you can just scale. But other than that, these are basically the rune pages that you could go. You could argue that in difficult matchups like an Orianna in the early game, like pre-6 is going to be very rough for you. And then you could argue to go Fleet. But I don't like it. Currently, I don't like Fleet. I feel like it's been nerfed too much to the point where I don't feel Akali has a lot of benefit from it. So for me, Akali only has 2 rune pages. This one and the Electrocute one, which looks like this. That's what I feel like are the 2 main setups for Akali right now. Fleet is just not that strong anymore, I feel like, on Akali. So this is it. And also typically when you go Fleet into those matches like an Orianna pre-6, but then at level 6 you can typically one-shot her with Electrocute. So if you just play a little bit safe, give up a little bit more minions than when you would go Fleet, you can still snowball at level 6 with Electrocute. So I still like it. But that's it. That's everything about the runes. So yeah, hopefully everything is clear. Alright, so let's take a closer look at Akali's builds. And believe me, there's quite a lot to look at, and there's probably some builds that I'm even missing because Akali can build a lot of items. But we're going to be looking at it because I feel like there's only like a few common builds that are actually like gonna be the best for you consistently. And then you have a lot of other builds you could go, but they're typically not that optimal. They're typically viable, but not optimal. So I start here with putting some items here down that I think are viable on Akali. There are other items viable, but these are the main AP items that are viable. So you could go all of these items. Now I didn't put Cosmic Drive or something like that in here because I feel like Cosmic Drive right now isn't really an item. It's so bad to the point where you really don't want to go it. So I already took into account whether items are currently bad or not on this in this current state of these last couple of patches. So all of that has been accounted for already. So first of all, let's start with your starter items. For your starter items, I would always choose either between Doran's or the shield or the ring. Very simple. If you are in a lane that can constantly poke you, you can just go Doran's shield with 1 potion. If you are in a lane that you can maybe fist fight in the early game, like a Silas, something like that, or a Yone, then you can for sure take a Doran's ring. Now, even in those matchups where you can maybe fist fighting, like a Yone, for example, they might sometimes take, like a Yone likes to take Fleet Footwork with Second Wind and D-Shield and Potions. And then these champions become unkillable anyway. So then I feel like sometimes you can also just go D-Shield and also just make it in yourself easier in lane to become unkillable as well. because killing them at that point will be difficult, even if you have like a Doran's Ring. But yes, in like fistfight matches like Silas or something, who also go like Doran's Shield, and they don't typically go Fleet into Akali, you can definitely go Doran's Ring. With that being said, let's take a look at what your first base typically look like. Assuming that your first base is not like above 1k gold, it's just normal amount of gold, this would be your first base. So I like to pick up a Dark Seal always in the early game because it's just the most gold efficient item you can buy. So then on my first base, I will typically pick up like Boots and a Dark Seal. If I have more gold, Boots, Dark Seal, and an Amplifying Tome, for example. Or sometimes I just go with Dark Seal and Amplifying Tome. If I don't need the Boots, like if I'm in a fistfight matchup, like Silas, for example, again, I don't necessarily need the Boots. It's not like I need the movement speed to catch on to him, like he's just going to jump on me anyway. So then Dark Seal and Amplifying Tome is just going to give me more damage. But let's say I'm playing in a mage matchup, I'm playing versus Orianna or something, then I would take Boots. It's going to help me with dodging the abilities, her skill shots, and also just running away from her and getting onto her. So then buying early Boots is great, and picking up a Dark Seal along that. Now, even if I could buy something like, let's say, a Hextech Alternator, which is 1.1k gold, let's say I would have the gold to pick that up, I typically wouldn't even buy it. Again, if I'm in a fistfight matchup and on my first recall I have the gold to buy this, I would buy it. But if I need Boots, if I'm in a matchup where I have enough gold to buy Hextech Alternator, but I do need Boots, like I'm playing versus more difficult matchups where I need to dodge skill shots and like run away from our opponent or get onto them because they're long range, then I would not buy this. I would, even if I have the gold for it, I wouldn't buy it. I would go for Boots of Speed and then see what I can do with the rest of my gold, which is typically going to buy a Dark Seal on top of that and maybe an Amp Tone. And at that point, then we spend what, like, also like around like a 1k gold or 1.1k gold, around that. And then, yeah, that's what I would buy. So I wouldn't always buy Hextech Alternator, for example, even if I had the gold for it. Then let's take a look at the Boots. As a side note, I don't like to rush Boots on Akali anymore. I used to like it back in the past, but they nerfed the Boots so super hard to the point where, yeah, look at Mercury Threats, 20 magic resist, and it's 1.3k gold. And then Sorcery Shields gives you like, what, 12 magic pen right now, so I hate rushing Boots right now, so I typically just go into my full item first, and that's why it's also so good to build Boots of Speed early on, because I don't upgrade my Boots anyway until I have like completed my first item. So then having a little bit of extra movement speed is a necessity in the early game. So keep that in mind, I don't rush my Boots, I just put them here already because, yeah, we're going to talk about all the other builds here. So for now, let's just quickly get that out of the way, the Boots. Very simple, what Boots do you buy? In 90% of the games, I would just go Sorcery Shoes, but if the enemy team is full AD, which rarely happens, I would go Plated Steel Caps. And if the enemy team is full Magic Resist, you could go Mercs, and sometimes they don't need to be full Magic Resist to go Mercs. For example, against champions like a Syndra. If you play versus, like, let's say the enemy team has like a mid-jungle duo, like a Syndra in the mid lane and then like a Lilia in the jungle, then you're going to get a lot of value from the Mercury Threats, and then I would just go the Mercury Threats. But also just in general, if you play versus mages who are giving you a hard time, you could in the early game buy like a no magic mantle or whatever it's called. So here, this one, the no magic mantle, and then you kind of want to upgrade it into something anyway, and then typically that's just going to be Mercs. So that's completely fine. But like I said, in like 80% of the games, I would just go with the Sorcery Shoes. Okay, with that being said, let's take a look at the full items here, the full item builds. Now, there's many builds, but so far the ones I enjoy the most and the ones I've experimented with are all of these here, and we're going to talk about it a little bit right now. So the first builds, if I am playing versus a full squishy team comp, I'm probably just going to go like full flat pan. I'm just going to go 2 double magic pen items, flat pan items, because one is flat pan good, but enemies are not rushing magic resist. So if I'm like the solo AP on my team and they have like squishies, I will literally deal true damage to them if I go these 2 items. So then going Storm Surge is great as a first item. I don't like it as a second. I like it as a first item because it's very easy to proc as a first item. And I feel like Shadow Flame, it's a lot more difficult to proc it, to proc the extra damage on it as a first item. Whereas if you already have an item to deal extra damage, then it's going to be a lot easier to proc the passive of Shadow Flame as well. So that's why Shadow Flame is like a great second item and Storm Surge more of a better first item. Now, with that being said, like I said, this is double flat pan, and I would only go this against like very a full squishy team comp, because like ADCs and stuff, they typically like they're squishy and they typically don't build magic resist anyway, and then flat pan is really ridiculously OP. Now on Akali, typically if you have already like these two items, you like after your first two items, Akali has an insane amount of damage typically. And then you would just go into Zhonya's as a third item, because it makes you a lot safer and is very good onto Akali. But if you don't need the Zhonya's, I would advise you to go straight into Death Cap. Now, typically you're gonna need the Zhonya, so then you're gonna go into a Death Cap afterwards, and then you can finish it off with a Void. But like if you have double pen, you already have so much pen, to the point where if they don't have a, like if you don't build magic resist, then I would just skip the Void and build something else. Maybe a Banshees or whatever you like. But then I wouldn't go with a Void. But if they did buy, let's say they started building a lot of magic resist, it's still viable to still build the Void, even though you have these two items, if they stack a lot of MR. Then let's go to the second build, where we're basically going to do the same build, but we're going to replace Storm Surge with a Lich Bane. Lich Bane, in my opinion, is really, really weak if you use it into squishies, because you're never going to benefit from the empowered auto attacks. Like in a squishy, you just one-tap them, so you don't need to get off too many passive auto attacks, you just one-tap them with your abilities. So then Lich Bane wouldn't make sense. But if the enemy team has some tanks in the team, some bruisers, like a Set or something in the top lane, or maybe just some Rod of Ages abusers, like a Silas or something, like, and into those champions you can get off a lot of auto attacks. So then I would still go Shadow Flame for the burst and all the other items, but I would replace Storm Surge with Lich Bane, because Lich Bane will deal a lot of damage at that point, because you will be able to get in all those extra auto attacks. So against those, like when the enemy team has like a mix of squishies and a mix of like some bruisers and tanks, I feel like Lich Bane is a great item to replace Storm Surge. Again, with Lich Bane Shadow Flame, you're going to deal so much damage that you typically just want to go with Zhonya's afterwards to be a bit more safe. But if you don't need the Zhonya's, just go Death Cap and then maybe go Zhonya's afterwards. Or if you still don't need it, you can build a Void afterwards and then the Zhonya's maybe. Or like if you don't really need a Zhonya's, you can build a Banshees or a Riftmaker, depending on the game. But that's basically what it's going to look like. Something like this is going to be typically your standard build. Now, if we play versus a full bruiser tanky team, like let's say they have like many tanks, like at the very least like 3 tanks, or like bruisers like Silas mid lane, a Mumu jungle, Set top, and maybe Leona support or something, or like a Galio mid and the Sion top lane, and maybe a Leona support again. Like if they have like 3 tanky or bruiser type of champions, I would consider going like the tankier setup here. And then also you compare this, like you go Conqueror in these setups to make it even better. And then for the burst ones here, you go Electrocute to make it even better. But that's just rune and build synergy. But yeah, if you play versus these bruiser tankier teams, then I would go this build. Again, many people would not go Lich Bane here. They would typically just go Riftmaker and then into Liandry's. But I feel like Riftmaker, you lack the burst in the early game against these champions. If you play versus these tankier champions, you lack the burst in the early game. So I really like Lich Bane in the early game, because in the early game, those tanks aren't really tanks. They're still like not that strong yet. So then I like Lich Bane a lot. So I like to build Lich Bane, and also it's going to be valuable, because even if they build tank, you're going to get in a lot of empowered auto attacks onto these enemies. So not only is it going to give you like a lot of AP to one-shot squishies, it's also going to be good into those tanks. So I like to build it even if they have a lot of tanks. And then I like to build into Riftmaker Liandry's, just because yeah, you're going to be fighting tanks, so you're going to be fighting for a long time. You're going to need max health damage, so then Liandry's and Riftmaker are great options as well. Now, many people go Riftmaker Liandry's. I typically go Liandry's first and then Riftmaker, because I feel like Riftmaker is kind of bad if you don't have Liandry's. Liandry's, the max health damage is almost always good. Like after people build Roa or like a Heartsteel, they will already have some HP, and then Liandry's damage will already be significant. Whereas Riftmaker passive, it's not always easy to keep it up in the fight, specifically as Akali as well. You typically have to like stand in Shroud and wait a little bit, or go out the fight, wait for your cooldowns, wait for your energy. So it's not always easy to keep up the Riftmaker passive, and that's kind of why you buy the item in the first place. So Liandry's is going to make that a lot easier, because if you hit somebody with the Riftmaker and you activate your passive, it's going to stay for 4 seconds longer onto them, or 3 seconds, because Liandry's, the burn that applies to the enemies, keeps on stacking your Riftmaker. So I feel like Riftmaker becomes a great item the moment you have Liandry's. So it doesn't really make sense in my opinion to build Riftmaker first, so I would go Lich Bane, Liandry's, and then build into a Riftmaker. Now at that point, it completely depends on what you need to build. You might want to build a Banshees, for example, if they have like a lot of AP damage. But typically if you're fat, you can just go into a Death Cap. If not, go for Zhonya's, it's going to help you in the team fights. And then here I also put in the Void stuff. And now I know these are 5 items, so we can only build 5, we cannot build 6, we need boots. But sometimes you're gonna have to sacrifice either your Zhonya's or your Death Cap with a Void Staff. So then typically, since I want Death Cap in all of my builds because it makes you spike so hard, I will typically not build Zhonya's and then go Void. But I only do this when I need Void. Because keep in mind, tanks, you will deal a lot of damage to them with your Liandry's Torment because it's max health damage. So if there's like HP stacking tanks, like a Cho'Gath for example, Liandry's is typically fine and you don't need to Void Staff because you're already going to deal so much damage with Liandry's. However, if they are tanks who are not only building HP but also building like a lot of magic resist, like an Amumu for example could easily build a lot of magic resist, then you would need Void Staff because the damage over your Liandry's Torment is obviously still going to get like diminished by their magic resist. So then I would still go Void Staff if they have a lot of magic resist. And typically, more often than not, if you play versus tanks, they do tend to stack magic resist and then you do need a Void Staff. So then typically I like to build my Void as a 4th item because at this point they typically already have a lot of magic resist, and then I try to finish my build off with a Death Cap or with a Zhonya's or a Banshees if I really need them, but typically I'm going to sacrifice my Zhonya's then to make sure that I can still get a Death Cap and Void in this build. But yeah, that's going to be that build if you play versus bruisers and tanks. Now this is more of a personal experiment. And it's quite simple. I like Storm Surge as a first item. It deals a lot of damage into squishies, so I like it. But if you go Storm Surge, you are also relatively squishy yourself. And then typically you go Zhonya's to compensate for that. But I thought to myself, what if we go like a burst item like Storm Surge, and then we go Liandry's. Liandry's is almost always good, because almost in every single game there are people who stack HP. Like even Rod of Ages abusers, like a Silas maybe. Well, Silas doesn't have to go Rod of Ages, but like maybe a better example, like Cassio or Ryze. These champions, they're not really stacking magic resist, but like a Cassio, she likes to go like Liandry's, which gives her like HP. She likes to go like a Rylai's, which gives her HP. A Rod of Ages, which gives her HP. Many champions in the game, whether it's the Swain support or these Rod of Ages champions or tank top laners, typically there are going to be people like a Renekton who are, you're just going to benefit from the max health damage anyway. Liandry's is like a very good item in most games. So then I feel like you're never going to go wrong with the extra damage from Liandry's that you go. It's always going to be useful, almost always, unless they're like full squishies. But in almost all the other cases, it's going to be very useful. And it also gives you 300 HP, so it also makes you a lot tankier. So I was experimenting with this to see, okay, I deal damage, a lot of burst damage with my Storm Surge. Liandry's is almost always useful. So I really like this build, and it makes me a little bit tankier, so yeah, I can do whatever I want with it, I feel like. And then typically you would finish off the build again with either a Zhonya's if you have enough damage, or a Death Cap if you're snowballing really hard and you don't need the Zhonya's, and then finish it off with a Void Staff again. Now, this is a personal experiment, I understand. It's like a mixed build. It's like, and this is good against squishies and good against tanks, but it's not going to be great against full squishies and it's not going to be great against full tank. So it's like when you play here, like if you play versus a mix, where we went like Lichbane Shadowflame, I feel like you could also personally go maybe Storm Surge Liandry's. And this is going to make you a little bit more, giving you a little bit more HP tankier than this build, but you're also going to have a little bit less damage, I feel like. So it's a personal experiment. I would recommend you guys to try it out because I am having a lot of fun with it. It feels relatively strong right now. But yeah, if you're starting out as Akali, I would start with this build against squishies, this build against a mix of tanks and squishies, and then this build against tanks. And then this is a personal experiment. I don't know where we're going to end up with this, but I'm liking it so far quite a lot. Then let's take a look at the Rocket Belt. Is Rocket Belt still viable on Akali? Rocket Belt has always been a great pick on Akali because of course it allows you to get onto those enemies, ranged enemies, and then just ult them down and run them down. Now Rocket Belt is 2.6k gold, so it's relatively cheap, but you do only get 60 AP. It is absolutely dog shit in my opinion. Now, Rocket Belt feels kind of decent. It feels kind of good if you already have some damage in your build. So, if you already have that Storm Surge or that Shadow Flame, at that point, Rocket Belt feels really, really good. So, could you build Rocket Belt? In my opinion, yes, but not as a first item anymore. You could put it somewhere in your build, but I feel like you already need some early game damage to be able to snowball, and then you could go Rocket Belt perhaps, if you really need it, if you play into a very long-range enemy team comp. But still, I'm not a big fan of it. But like I said, you could go it, but you would need already some items in your build. And then the problem with it is, where do you fit it in? Like, let's say You play versus squishies, like you want to go this build, but they're all ranged. Like Serath mid lane or Ziggs mid lane, Ashe Valkos bot lane, Kindred in the jungle, like full range enemy team comp. What do? Well, I would still go this build typically, because where am I going to fit in my rocket belt here? Like, where am I going to fit it in? I kind of want to have these 2 items for burst, and then my rocket belt becomes good. But at that point, I typically already need the Zhonya's or a decap or a void. So it's like, these are like all better alternatives than rocket belt. And then, yeah, I would just take flash and rely on my flash a little bit in those fights, in those games, rather than rocket belt. But you could eventually, for example, like switch this, like maybe go Storm Surge first item for the burst, and then put a rocket belt here instead of Shadow Flame, and finish off the build like this. I feel like that's also a possibility. It is still viable, but not as a first item in my opinion. That's my take on it. And then, are tank items viable on Akali? Many people go like tank items onto Akali. I think yes, very sure. Like for sure, I think they're viable. Now, I didn't put all the tank items here that I think are viable on Akali, but I just put some to give you an idea of what I think can be viable on Akali. But like, let's say you play into like, I don't know, like a full magic resist enemy team comp, or like a full AP damage enemy team comp. You can just stack magic resist. You can go items like a Hollow Radiance in your build, or a Rookern, or maybe a combination of both. Right? Maybe you go like a Banshees. You go like a Banshees against their AP damage, but they're full AP, so you can't stack MR. So on top of your Banshees, you can maybe go a Rookern, or maybe even a Maul of Marmortius, because this is going to give you magic resist, but it's also going to give you AD damage, and you do skill with AD damage. You don't skill that well with AD, but it's still fine to go it if they're like full magic resist, right? It's completely fine then, I think. But you could also go Rookern or Hollow Radiance. I think it's completely fine. If they're full AD, you could consider like going Randuin's if they have like a lot of crit, or maybe Iceborne Gauntlet. It also provides some utility for your team with the slow. So yeah, you could also go Jack Show if they have like a mix of both. If they're like, let's say they're like 4, like let's say you already have like so much AP, but they're ADC. They still have an ADC who's like AD, and you already stacked so much AP, or like magic resist. So then you could just go Jack Show to get a little bit more magic resist, but also a bit armor for the ADC, for example. So I think this is all fine, but of course this is all very situational. If they're like full AD, full AP, this is typically not going to happen that much in your games. So then you will have to resort back to these 3 main builds, and maybe this personal experiment of mine as well. That was a lot about builds, but that's it. We finally got through it. So let's go to the next part of this guide. All right, let's take a look at Akali, her abilities and her combos. Because typically when people think of Akali, they think of her as a very difficult to play champion. I wouldn't label her as very difficult. I would label her as a champion with extreme high skill ceiling, making a good Akali play. Like, I feel like if you do the normal combos well enough, like I do, I can easily climb to Grandmaster with this champion, as I've done in Season 13. And then the difference between like a very great Akali who can get like to Challenger, like rank 1, or like very high up in on the ranked ladder, I feel like it's the versatility that they can do with the combos, like knowing when to do what exactly, using your combos in a very creative way. But that's it. Like, the skill ceiling is very high. It's like Irelia, but like Irelia's skill ceiling is also super high, but it's very simple. You just EQ, right? It's on Akali is the same. Everything is very intuitive, but there is a very high skill ceiling because, yeah, you kind of do a lot with it. Your abilities are, you can use them in a lot of different situations. So we're going to break things down. I'm going to make it easy for you guys, and hopefully you're going to understand it. Now, I'm not just going to do combos like, hey, this is how you should fight in team fight. No, let's build it up. Let's see what you should do at level 1, level 2. Let's build it up, and let's see how you should be playing the game at every point in the game. So let's start at level 1. At level 1, what I typically like to do is, of course, you level Q. And then if I have Electrocute, if I have Conqueror, I wouldn't do this. But if I have Electrocute, which is like 90 or 80% of my games, like in Squishy Champions, I would do this. I Q, walk out, walk up, do the Q, and get out. So that's at level 1. Even if I'm playing versus a mage, I'm going to try and do this. Because typically, even if against a mage like an Ahri, you walk up to farm, they want to walk up to punish you, you know that they want to walk up to punish you, so you also walk up at that exact moment, and now they are in your Q range, you can walk back, walk up to them, auto, and then do another Q here, and get out. And that will proc your Electrocute. So, let me show you what it actually looks like. So here, let's say this is an Ahri, we are farming minions, she walks up, okay, we just walk up, Q, auto, Q again, and we walk out. Right. And that's typically the trade I like to do, and almost nobody will outtrade you. Like 90% of mid laners will not outtrade you. Now, even if they do outtrade you, Akali has very high base regen, a lot more than most other champions, and typically you also go second wind. And if you have D-shield, you even have more regen. So typically you regen quicker than your opponent, so it's just okay to get them low, even if you're even lower. So that's how I trade at level 1 with Electrocute. With Conqueror, I would just play safe and do mages, for example, at level 1. With that being said, what do we do at level 2? Well, it's actually very simple, so let me level up here. On level 2, you don't have to go for E. If you play in, like, if you had a very successful trade at level 1, your opponent is already half HP, and he's pretty bad. Like, you find like many E angles onto him. You could put a point in E and look to hit him with E. But typically in most lanes, if they are somewhat good players, you're not going to have that many angles to hit your E onto them in the early game. So then I just like to go W second. And that allows me for longer trading. And then all you do is, again, if they walk up, you W, go like this, you do your Q, and now you use your Shroud, you use the energy, and you run them down. That's basically what it looks like at level 2. Now, nothing special there, so let's take a look at level 3. Now, at level 3, we have actually multiple opportunities. We could go, so let me level up here real quick. At level 3, you could go for E, but you could also go for Q. Because if you have 1 point here in Q, it's 110 energy for a Q. If you put 2 points into it, it's 100 energy, which makes it 1, easier to trade, and 2, also, yeah, it's significantly more damage if you put 2 points into Q. So, typically, if you still can't hit your E, if you still note that you're playing versus somebody that it's almost impossible to hit your E onto because you don't find any angles, or maybe they're slow pushing into you and they have like a very big wave so you can't hit them, then I would just put 2 points in Q, and then you can do the same trade as on level 2 you did, and it will be very strong. You will deal a lot of damage because you will have 2 points in Q. However, most of the time I will go with E, because typically there is an angle that maybe you can find. Unless they're like slow pushing, then you could put 2 points in Q. But also E is relatively safe for ganks. If they gank you, you can just escape with E. So that's what I typically do. Now then, there are multiple opportunities, of course. Right? It's very intuitive here what you could do. The standard trading combo at level 3 would be this. So you hit your E out of nowhere onto them. You go in, you attack, you start running them down with Q. But maybe I should put off this though. So let me do that again. So that it's like a real game. So we E, we go in, we do the auto attack, we start running them down with Q. So auto attack, Q, and now we don't have energy, so we use Shroud. And we run them down again. Right. So that's something that you can do, of course, when you're looking to all-in them. Now it could also be otherwise, like could also be different. At level 3 sometimes, like I said, you don't find the E angle, but you still leveled E. So then you can just use it as a gap closer. Like in lane, if I can't reach onto the enemy Ahri, for example, I might just do EQ and walk out, for example, or then walk up. So that's also a possibility. Starting from level 3, you could also do the EWQ combo, where you do this. And then you walk out. But I don't necessarily like it, because you use and your E and your W. So those are 2 very important and very long cooldowns, so you don't typically want to use them just to get off some damage onto your opponent. Typically the threat of having them is more important than doing that quick trade. So I wouldn't waste my W and my E. But you could definitely do E, and then you walk up, you maybe dodge a spell shot with your Shroud, and you just run them down. That's completely fine. So that's something you are looking for at level 3. But I typically don't trade that much at level 3. I trade at level 1, and then at level 2, I put point in my W and I look to trade. At level 3, I'm typically pretty safe. And at level 4, that's when I trade, because then I have 2 points in Q. And that's when you really become a lot stronger. Once your Q is only 100 energy and it does significant more damage. So your windows are actually level 1 with Electrocute. And then level 2 maybe with Shroud. And then level 4 again. I wouldn't trade too much at level 3. Most champions can actually fight you at level 3 because you don't have that much damage if you can't hit your E. But if you have 2 points at Q at level 3, you can for sure fight. Otherwise, you just fight at level 4. And then you deal a lot of damage. And then again, it's the same. You try to hit an E out of nowhere. So you hit it. I'm going to have to put this away. And then you start running them down. Right? Oh, it's still on. It's very simple. Again, you hit an E out of nowhere. You look to walk up, auto attack Q, look to run them down perhaps. We have no energy. Use Shroud. Right. You could also use Shroud earlier, of course. You could also do it earlier. I like to do it a little bit earlier. And that would look something like this. So I E in, I do the auto attack, I instant Shroud, and now I Q. That's also completely fine. And now you can also just keep on trading here. So that's also a nice trade that I like to do, a nice combo. Then, so my main power spikes are level 1, level 2, and level 4, I feel like, and mainly level 1 and level 4, but level 2 is typically easy because you have Shroud, and then with Shroud you can take easy trades. Now, then level 5 isn't too special, honestly, but what is kind of useful is level 6, so level 5 is just the same trading pattern, but at level 6, other things happen. At level 6 you have your ultimate, and now you can start doing your ultimate combo. What is your ultimate combo? Well, it's extremely easy what to do. Yeah, obviously you're just going to ult onto them. What you could, like, let's maybe start with a more alternative approach. So typically, again, you hit your E, you go in, and that's when you can ult, for example, and then you start winning them down, and then things like that. What I like to do typically is I like to engage with R if possible, and if not, I just flash R. But I like to engage with R at level 6. It gives you a lot of freedom. You still have your E and W then, so I try to make sure that they overextend, and if they don't, I typically like to use flash. I don't like to use E and Shroud too much as a gap closer at level 6. Because they are also trading tools, you know, so you don't want to use them for gap closing. So what I like to do at level 6, you let your opponent push towards you, you look to freeze the wave here, and then when they walk up, you look to do your ult combo. Now what is your ult combo? You're going to R, E, activate the E, auto attack, and then you can run them down with Qs, for example. Maybe even Shroud, and then you can always R at the last moment. You want to keep your R2 as long as possible, because frankly, it does just more damage the lower they are. So if you want to secure the kill, get them as low as possible, and then you can all in them. Because many times I see people, they all in their opponent, and they can't kill them. And then they're like, if I coach them, why could I not kill this guy? You said I could just all in. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but you didn't do all your damage, right? You have to get them first low, and then your ultimate will do a lot more damage. Right? Your ultimate can deal a lot of damage. Look, it can right now from... The difference is, if you don't... If they're like under the threshold, or not under the threshold, you will only deal 80 damage. Whereas if you do the maximum damage, it will be 240 damage. That is a very significant difference. Right? So you want to really use your ultimate as an execute for sure. Now, there are a couple of things you need to be aware with your ultimate. And they're mainly the timing of your E. If you instantly press RE, this is going to happen. And your E is going to follow your opponent. So what I'm basically trying to say is here, let me break it down for you. If I R over the dummy, or if I press R, and if I, after my R, if I press it, I instantly press E, my E will be input buffered. Meaning that if this target starts walking, my E will follow them. So it's basically a free hit onto your opponent because you input buffered it. That's really good. Of course, if they flash it, yeah, your E is not going to hit. But if they don't flash it, your E should hit. Because it's input buffered. It will automatically go onto them. The problem with that is, it's very slow. Look at this animation, it's very slow, and I'm very far away. I cannot Q right now to kill them. So, or like to deal damage to them. So it's very slow, and you end up very far away from the dummy. So yes, it is a guaranteed hit, but you end up very far from the dummy, and it's a very slow animation, it doesn't go off too fast. So what you can do instead is, you kind of want to time your E not here, not after you press R and then press it instantly here, your E. You kind of want to R and press your E the moment you're like here, just behind the dummy. That way, it's going to go a lot smoother. So look how quick the animation goes here. And now I can instantly R and then E back, and, you know, I can do whatever I want there. So the specifics we're going to talk about later. But that is what you can do here. So if you time your E here, look at the animation. It's a lot shorter. I'm already here. I can start queuing. I can ER, of course. But it's a lot smoother. It goes a lot quicker, the animation. Now, there's also something else you could do. You can also make sure that you end up in front of the dummy. So I R, but I don't dash over them. I end up in front of the dummy. This can be very useful if you try to like dive somebody. Here, if I dive this guy, look, now I'm going to take turret shots. Even if I escape, I take 2 turret shots. And that might mean that I die, because maybe I'm low when I try to dive this guy. So that's not what I try to do. So instead, you kind of want to ult this guy, but end up here, so that you don't take turret damage. Very important. How do you do that? Well, you kind of have to be max range with your ultimate, so you need to make sure that your opponent is in max range, and then when you are, you try to E here. You try to E not after the dummy, but you try to E before Akali reaches the dummy. So while you're in the air, when Akali is here, that is when you want to E. If you do that, you are going to end up in front of the dummy. So let me show you. So I walk up, I try to dive this guy, and then I end up here. And now I can E and ult, and all the damage goes off on the dummy. But, very important, I didn't take any turret shots. So that's very, very strong as well. That's another way on how to use your ult. But it all has to do with when you time your shuriken. Now, also you might have noticed, so let me quickly ult here. You might have noticed that, look, if I stand close to my target here, and I R backwards, the damage is still going to go off on the dummy. It still goes off on the dummy. So keep that in mind. Akali, many people think that if you play Akali, that you have to like dash through them, but not necessarily. Look, I don't dash through them right now, and the damage still goes off. And that's just because your ultimate, just like your E, has like a very small hitbox behind you as well. So even though I stand here and I ult this way, my E has a very small hitbox behind me. So that's why you can just ult, stand before people and still ult backwards and you will still damage them, which is very good because many people will do this. Their opponent right now is low and they think they need to ult through, but then they're going to die because they're going to take turret shots. Instead, just ult backwards and the damage also goes off. So that's also very important. Now, there's also something with your E that I want to talk about. So I already said when we looked at the abilities, when I talked about Akali E, is that Akali, she doesn't throw her E and then dash. Her E animation is that she first dashes and then throws her E. And that's why this is going to happen. So I stand in front of the dummy, yet my E hits the dummy, which can be very frustrating. So for example, let's say this is a minion. Let's say this is a minion. And this is an enemy champion. So you walk past the minion, you try to... Oh, I don't have my E. So you walk past this minion here to try to hit the enemy champion, you E, and you still hit this guy. Very, very annoying. So this, keep that in mind. You always have to stand enough, like in front of a target, like a minion or a champion, to get onto the things before you. Now there is a way to cancel this animation, but you're going to have to use flash. So as Akali, you could do this. You could flash E. And it has a lot of range. So look, you can, for example, I could flash here and still hit my E onto this champion. So that's a very long distance. Now, look at my flash E range. So flash E range, it's all the way over there. And now look at my E flash range. E flash. It's a lot shorter. So while you can E flash onto Akali, like this. Oh, excuse me. So like this. It's a lot shorter range than the flash E. It's a lot longer range. So why would we ever want to E flash if it's so much shorter range? Well, with E flash, you can cancel the E animation. So look, if I flash E, this is happening. You see? I always dash back. You always have the animation. So, which is annoying because I could flash here, or like I could flash in front of this guy and then still hit this guy. You see? So that's why flashing might even be bad. I flash and then I still E and I still hit this guy. So in those situations, if you really want to secure the E onto this guy, you might have to E flash, even though your range is shorter. But here it would look something like this. Rather than doing the flash E, we're going to E flash. And this cancels the animation of your E right now. I hope that you saw that, right? Like I didn't dash backwards. And also it's a lot harder for the enemies to react to the E flash combo. Because yeah, it goes off so quickly that they might just not notice this. They might just get surprised by it. So it's also a great surprise tool, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well with your E. All right, so now, last but not least, I want to talk about the flashes on Akali. So you can use flash on almost all of your abilities. So for example, we already talked about it. If you flash E, you have the E animation still. But if you E flash, yes, the range is shorter, but you can cancel your E animation. So E flash, instantly get cancelled. Harder to react to for enemies, and you can jump over minions and champions that way. Now, it's the same for your Q, but the problem is with your Q, just like your E, it feels like your range is a lot shorter when you Q flash than when you flash Q. So if I flash Q, well, I need to do it at range, of course. That would be useful. So if I flash Q, I can still hit my target here at maximum range. Right? Nothing too special. But look, I'm going to Q flash. Okay, this is fine. And now, again, I'm going to Q flash. And the damage doesn't go off. So the further away you are from the target, the less damage, like it's very inconsistent to hit this damage on the dummy. Right? It's very inconsistent. So you see the blades behind the dummy, so it's not like I'm casting it wrong, but the damage doesn't go off. Now, if you're very close to the dummy, it will work. The damage will go off for some reason. So it feels like the range is not true. When I Q flash, it doesn't deal damage to here. It feels like it only deals damage to here, like half the range. So keep that in mind. I typically go, if I'm on long distance, just flash Q, making sure the damage goes off. Whereas if I'm short range and I want to surprise people, that's when I can hook the Q flash. Then the damage is consistent on short range. Now, under W, yeah, you can't really use you can't W flash. You can't input buffer the W, but you can flash W, and you don't really need to input buffer the W anyway. You can't, but you don't need to, because there's not really an animation. If I flash W, I can instantly move almost. It's like a tenth of a second that I'm like in the air, but I can almost instantly move, so I don't need to input buffer. But yeah, you can't input buffer anyway. And then E we already explained, and then R, of course. So we can do flash R and we can do R flash. So first, R flash, the damage will go off onto your target, but it's I wouldn't say it's easy to do in the game, right? It isn't that easy to do. I would just flash R. It goes almost as quickly, and it's a lot more guaranteed. So this is also smooth, and the damage is a lot easier to hit onto the target than R flashing. So I feel like this is a lot better. A use case for this, very simple. You are playing in the lane, both of you are very low, you are looking to walk away, for example, and your opponent doesn't know you have R2 still, or like maybe he gets surprised, and then you just flash R. And you just kill him. So that's a beautiful use case as well. Now, with your R as well, something I want to talk about, and this is very, very niche, but I have used it in some games. R flash to cancel your first R to run away. So, let's say you don't have your E for some reason, and you need to walk away. This guy is running you down right now. But let's say you're 2 HP. So what could you do? You don't have your W and your E, but you need to run away right now. You have flash, but if you flash, yeah, he might still get onto you. Who knows? So maybe you want to do R over him, and then walk away, and then you could flash R2, right? But that, like, while you are, he can damage you here and maybe kill you before you can do this and then flash or whatever. So Ring onto him is dangerous. He might kill you while you do that. So maybe if he's chasing you, you can maybe just quickly walk behind him and then R and then get out. For example, then flash R, who knows? But still, we're going to have to wait. And he might hit us while we do all of that. So a nice little niche trick that you could do if you're running away from your opponent, you could escape, making sure you're not in his damage range, if he's a melee champion, for example, and you still R onto him. And you just press R flash. You just press, hopefully you saw that, so you just press R flash. Very simple. So R flash. And now I'm already here. He is still following me, and now I can R2 as well. So I escaped from this guy, and he wasn't able to hit me. So very simple. So I'm walking away from this guy, R flash. I keep on walking, and I R2. So it's a very niche thing, but it has helped. It has helped me from time to time. So yeah, that's maybe something interesting. And then also you can cancel your E with your R. So for example, if you E in, you can cancel that with your R. So that's also something that I wanted to mention. You can cancel it with R. Now you can also cancel your R2 with flash. So you can redirect your R2. So you can R flash, and the damage will go off on the dummy. So that's also something interesting. So maybe there's a guy here, and you bait like you go onto him, like R flash, and then you hit both of them. I hit this guy, and I hit this guy. Right. So that is something, it's also not that easy. But once you get used to it, like it's completely fine. So you R flash, and you hit both of them. So that's something you could do. You can redirect your ultimate here. That's something I also wanted to mention. And then if you really wanted to be advanced, you could E, cancel your E with R, and then flash. Very advanced, I know. And it's very simple. It's just to make sure, like, let's say this is a Lux. Or let's say this is a Lux. And you E in, but she's going to Q you. So you dodge the Q with R, and then you flash onto her. Right? Now I'm explaining it, so it was a bit difficult to hit it. But so again, E, this is a Lux Q. We dodge it with R, and we flash onto the opponent. So we dodge the Q, and we still R on her. So that's something that you might want to do as well. So that's just to use enemies, their abilities. Now you can also just flash. You could also just E, flash, and then R. So you don't have to do it like this. So what I just told you is this. So you E, R, flash. So you redirect your R. That might be advanced. So it's fast. So they can't react to it. But it might be a bit advanced. So if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can also just use your flash first here to dodge it. And then you R through them. Right? But they have more reaction time. Like even if you do it fast, like look, they're still going to have reaction time to it. So I E, flash R, they have more reaction time to it than when I do this. If I were to ER flash, yeah, they don't have reaction time for this. Right. So it's more of, yeah, what's your skill level? That's what I mean with the high skill ceiling of Akali. Is there going to be a big difference between these two combos? In both cases, you do dodge the ability. So it doesn't really matter how quickly you do it. Sometimes, yes, against very good players, yes, but in the lower elos, or like even like Master Grandmaster, I don't think it matters that much. So that's another great tip about the combos here. That's about everything I wanted to mention. Maybe something useful here at the last thing for the people who are still watching this. In lane, what I like to do is when I trade with somebody, this is like a last tip, a cheeky little tip that I use a lot to like get win many trades, is I use minions to go ward. So for example here, I ward and now I go E to the minion and I didn't miss any XP. So I like that a lot. Also, I use minions to all in. So many people say, oh, you E backwards and you Q to get onto your opponent. Sure, that works. But yeah, now I don't have anywhere to go back. So I can't go back here. I need to walk away. Might not be ideal. Okay, what's the solution to that? Well, I could WE and Q and now fight. And now I can E back. Sure, but now I don't have my W anymore. Which is also not ideal. I wasted 2 key abilities and very long cooldowns. So instead, you could use your E on the minion. Now look to trade with this guy, for example, I don't know, and then go back to the minion, if it's not dead yet, of course. Typically, I do this on cannon minions, because obviously if you E, and now they die in the process before you can E back, yeah, you can't go back. So you need to make sure the minion is, one, healthy enough, it's probably not being targeted by your minions, or it's like a cannon minion, for example. That's a cheeky little tip how you can use your E as well in lane to ward and to take trades for the people who decided to watch all of this. Alright guys, so before we go to the next part of this guide, I quickly want to talk about some drills that you can use for the combos here. So we went over the combos, we went over the specific things of Akali, but I quickly want to go over the main combos so you have a great idea of what they are and how to drill them in a practice tool. So the main combo, for example, the first one I would use, because you have to do a lot of Qs on Akali, is I would want you to do this. So you Q, you walk out, you do 1 auto attack, you Q again, and you do 1 auto attack again. So 2 Qs, 2 auto attacks. I want you to drill it. I want you to do it every single game, every single day before you play Akali, before you play ranked. I just go to the practice tool real quick and do this combo 3 times without failing it. So that would be up. We do this, Q, auto attack. Okay, we wait until we have abilities. Okay, we do the same. Q, walk up. Right. Okay, we do it last time. So you walk up. There we go. That's the complete drill for the first combo. Now we go to the second combo. The second combo is going to be with our W, but it's kind of the same. So we're just going to skip it and we're just going to go to the E combo. So that's going to be our second combo. So our E is just going to be, so we hit E, we go in, we do the empowered auto attack, we press Shroud, and we start queuing. Auto, Q, auto. Just the same like the first one. So this is what I want you to practice for your next, like 3 times without failure. So again, E, E, N, auto attack, Shroud, Q, auto attack, Q, auto attack. And you do that 3 times. So again, I'm going to do it. So auto attack, Shroud, Q, auto attack, Q, auto attack. And one last time, because we need to do it 3 times without failing. Auto attack, W, Q, auto attack, Q, W. There we go. Second combo, 3 times without failure. Okay, we're doing this good. Third combo. Well, the third combo is actually quite simple. And it's just going to be W, E, Q, auto, Q, E. Just to get a use of dashing forward, right? You can also do it just with E, like if you want to, you can also do this. It's completely fine by me, but I like to do it with Shroud because then you're under the time pressure of the E, so you need to do it quickly. So E, Q, auto Q, and now you can see at time here, you don't have that much time, so you feel a bit pressured, so it's good to practice it. And then one last time, because we need to do it 3 times again, W, E, Q, auto Q, and then typically just E. And that's another good drill. So 3 times again, successfully, we can go to the next combo. So that was the third combo. The fourth combo is going to be simple. It's going to be with ultimate. So what do we do with ultimate? We R, E, and then we just E in auto attack W, Q, auto Q, auto, and then QR. It's very, very simple. And that last auto, or like that last Q, you maybe don't have to do it, whatever you want. But yeah, something along those lines is going to be fine to drill it. So RE, you E W, auto attack, W Q, auto Q, auto, and then if you want to Q, ult. Just to practice it, and then you do it fast, and I also want you to do it good. I don't want you to do this. It's fine, like, I do it actually good now. I don't want you to do like RE. So I don't want you to do this, because now it's a slow combo. You're very far away from the target. So what I want you to do is I want you to do it good. I want you to do it quickly. It's going to require a bit more skill, but it's going to be good. So I want you to pressure E here after the dummy and put your mouse here, back here, so that you will quickly, you will be short of the dummy. So something like this. And now you E, W, Q, auto Q, auto Q, R. And you do this 3 times. So again, we're going to walk up to the dummy, short range. You can Q in between if you want to. It doesn't really matter, because that's what you could do in a real game. Q, auto Q, R. Like, that's another benefit that maybe I haven't mentioned yet. If you do the R here, and you're going to E, like if you do the right combo, so let me quickly do it right. If you do the right combo here, so you walk to your opponent, you're right now so close to this dummy that you can already start queuing. But that's also really useful. But let's do it one more time. So it's very simple. So RE, we E, auto attack, shroud Q, auto attack Q, auto attack Q, R. It's very simple. And those are the combos that I want you to learn on Akali. That's it about the combos, guys. Let's go to the next part of this video. Now let's take a look at Akali's game plan. Let's start with the early lane phase. Now if I were to play versus something like a mage, then you typically want to soak XP rather than farming every minion in the very early laning phase. Look to only last hit minions if you won't take too much damage for it. And if you're about to take damage when you're last hitting a minion, you can maybe overstep and trade back with the enemy with your Q. Now, of course, when you play versus melee champions, you will have a lot more pressure, meaning that you typically shouldn't have too much trouble farming. Now, whether you play versus mages or melee champions, here's what you should do in the early lane phase. First of all, look to trade at level 1 if you have electrocute, and at level 2 if you put a point in W, you can also take a trade because Shroud makes it easy to trade. Now at level 3, I typically don't force too much, as I want to wait for my 2-point Q power spike at level 4. Because at level 3 you typically put a point in your E. Now if you don't find an E angle onto your opponent, it might be smart to next time in that same matchup go for like 2 points in your Q at level 3 already, and then you also spike at level 4. Now if you put a point in your E at level 3, then at level 4 you can definitely trade, because then you will have 2 points in your Q. Also, once you're the end of level 4 or maybe already level 5, I try to prepare the wave for my level 6 power spike. So basically at around level 5 I want to shove the wave to the enemy turret, look to take a recall and spend all my gold on items, and then when I come back to the lane the wave is going to be on my side of the lane, and I will hit level 6 in a great spot where I can easily all-in my opponent. And here's a tip: when all-inning your opponent, look to do the second dash of your ultimate, so your R2, when your opponent is below 30% HP, as that will give you the maximum damage on your R2 dash. And of course, this is something that's not Akali specific, but you can also always decide to trade with your opponent based on the following 3 main trading fundamentals. So whenever you have a level power spike in the early laning phase, you can look to trade with your opponent. And the same is true if your opponent's abilities are on cooldown. And last but not least, the third fundamental: if your minions are low HP, your opponent will walk up to last hit the minion, so that's also a good time to trade with your opponent and maybe look to hit the opponent with your E. Starting from level 6, if you can kill your lane opponent, hold the wave close to your turret and look to all-in your opponent with your E or your ultimate. If you can't kill your opponent, it's better to shove the wave to the enemy turret and just roam onto the map and get a lead by, for example, ganking your teammates, helping your jungler take an objective, or maybe invade the enemy jungler with your jungler. Typically, when one of the bot lane turrets have been destroyed, that's when the mid game starts. Now, as Akali in the mid game, you should go to the side lane to get solo gold and solo XP. But don't overdo it, especially like below diamond or below masters. Don't overdo the side laning. Because ultimately, you're Akali. Your champion is designed to fist fight, and remember, we need to end the game during the mid game. So whenever there's a play to be made and you have your ultimate and you're relatively strong in terms of items, for example, ditch the side lane and move to the fight if you see that the fight is about to start. However, if, for example, like, we need to be rational about it, right? You don't always have to move. For example, if you're like 500 gold away from your next item power spike and your ultimate is on a 40-second cooldown, don't fight, of course. Like, in those cases, just side lane until you have your gold spent, until you have your ultimate up again, and then if a fight happens, then you can react to it. So be rational about it. Now, Akali's goal in the side lane is very clear. First of all, try to kill your opponent by running them down in the long side lane with all your dashes. Now, a great tip for this is that you can do this by playing with the lane brushes and vision to surprise your enemies. Now, if you can't kill your opponent, or your opponent is not in lane for example, look to shove out the wave to their turret, so they have to go to that turret and kill those minions, and while they do that, you can already move on the map and create a number advantage to win a fight. Or something also that I like to do very much after shoving the wave to the enemy turret, is going into the enemy jungle, placing deep vision, and looking to kill people who are rotating between the side lane and the mid lane for example. Or maybe just picking the enemy jungler off who's just farming in his jungle. Or maybe it's the enemy ADC who's farming the red buff, or I don't know. Maybe it's somebody in their jungle that you can look to pick off. And last but not least, both for the mid and the late game, prepare objective teamfights. It's super important that you do this one. So before every objective, just recall 1 minute beforehand so you can start setting up vision and clearing vision around 30 seconds before the objective spawns. By recalling 1 minute before a dragon or a baron spawns, you allow yourself to spend all your golden items to be as strong as possible for the fight, buy a control ward if your oracle lens is on cooldown, etc. And then in the fight, you look to surprise and pick off the enemy high value backline targets. So for example, the enemy mid laner or the enemy ADC. But of course, wait for your team to engage first. Akali is not a great first engager, but she is amazing at follow-up engage. So if you have a Mumu or a Jarvan, let them engage first and then follow up with your engage. With that being said, let's move on to the next part of this guide. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the draft synergies to give you an idea of when you can pick Akali. Now, first of all, Akali is a pretty good blind pick champion, meaning that you can basically pick her in almost all the games. However, obviously there are certain conditions, certain drafts that can make it easier or harder to play Akali. Let's start with the most obvious one. Akali is great versus immobile squishy champions. So if the enemies pick something like Victor mid lane and Jinx bot lane, maybe with a Yuumi support, that's really looking good for Akali. On the other hand, if the enemies have a more tanky team comps, with like lots of CC, like tanky champions with lots of CC, or even an enchanter support with lots of CC, Akali tends to struggle. So think of champions like Poppy, Mumu, and Lulu. Now, Akali is also a great pick if your team has some engage champions, because Akali herself is actually bad at being the first engage. However, she's amazing at following up the engage of her teammates. So Akali loves to play with champions on her team like a Jarvan, a Mumu, a Maokai, and a Rell. That also means that Akali doesn't synergize well with junglers like a Master Yi or a Graves, as these champions don't want to be the first engage themselves. And last but not least, Akali is not that good versus champions who can reveal her in her W because the enemies might have true sight. Think of champions like a LeBlanc, Root like her E, Kai'Sa W, Rengar his ultimate, Fiddlesticks his W. All of those champions are going to be quite annoying to play into. Now I'll go over some common Akali mistakes that I've noticed that people make, either from people that I coach or just random Akali solo queue players. Number 1, not buying Dark Seal, and I think this speaks for itself. Dark Seal is one of the most gold efficient items in the game, so I would definitely buy it. You don't necessarily have to upgrade it into a Magi's, but building a Dark Seal is very strong. Number 2, instantly wasting their W, their Shroud in fights. I noticed that too many people, they go into a team fight and they instantly W, but after you W, you have very little self-peel for yourself. So I would definitely recommend to start experimenting with it and holding it a little bit longer and not just wasting it instantly. Number 3, in team fights, many people, they just go too deep and they forget that their teammates might not be able to follow them because they have so many dashes. Like as Akali, it's very easy to suddenly be very deep in the enemy team because you have so many dashes. Your teammates might not be able to follow up with you. So it's very important that before you engage, you keep track of what your teammates are. Can they easily move? Do they also have dashes? And track where they are on the map. For example, if you have a Rakan support, you might be able to go a lot deeper into the enemy team comp or in the enemy team, in the team fight, rather than when you have like a Lulu support. She might not be able to catch up with you as soon as a Rakan can. Number 4, engaging fights without letting their team engage first, especially when you have like a champion like a Mumu or a Jarvan on your team. This is a very important one. Too many Akali players, they just ult in and then they use their Shroud, and now they wasted their R1, they wasted their Shroud, their R2 is on a timer, so they need to start using it. It's a lot better if you let your Jarvan or your Mumu engage. Now the enemies also use their CC, and while they've used that, after that you can engage onto the high value backline targets. Number 5, not using brushes and vision control to their advantage. Using brushes and vision control allows you to surprise enemies and single-handedly win teamfights all by yourself. So look to buy control wards and oracle lens to dominate the vision control in the game. It's crazy how many times in the mid game before an objective fight, or just when people are rotating from mid to the side lane, I just go into the enemy jungle, I place a control ward or use an oracle lens to make sure the brush that I'm sitting in is not warded, and then I surprise enemies and kill them, pick them off, and we just take a turret for free after that, for example. And then number 6, not actively thinking about enemy self-peel tools such as a barrier, an exhaust, or Zhonya's. Now, your shroud can be of great use here to stall out fights and make enemies waste their sums, for example. Let's look at it like this, like if you know that the enemy ADC has exhaust, for example, look to bait it out, rather than just full blasting onto the enemy. Like go in shroud, for example, like go onto them, when they use their exhaust, then you go in shroud, so you become invisible, and you wait until the exhaust is over. Once the exhaust is over, that's when you look to engage with the rest of your abilities. And that's the same for Zhonya's, it's the same for GA, it's the same for all those things. You kind of want to play around them and you want to keep them in mind before you start a fight, whereas too many people, they don't press tab before a team fight and they're not aware of these tools that the enemies have. Now that's it for the common mistakes, and now let's move over to the next part of the guide. Alright, so for all the tier list lovers out there, I did make a matchup tier list for you guys, but keep in mind that tier lists are subjective and they depend on many factors. The same champion can be difficult to play against or easy to play against based on other factors in the game, such as the jungle matchup, for example. So take these tier lists with a grain of salt. Now, since matchup tier lists are not that useful in my opinion, I'm not gonna go over it, but definitely feel free to pause the video and take a look at it. And now finally, for the last part of this guide, let us take a look at the most important part of this guide, the skin tier list. Now obviously I'm kidding, skin tier lists are obviously very objective, so I won't talk too much about it. However, what I do want to say is that some skins are objectively smoother than the other ones, and if you buy a skin that's below the A tier of this list, it might feel clunky, with the exception of Star Guardian, True Damage and Crime City Akali. While these skins are smooth, I put them below the A tier because I think Star Guardian has an annoying HUD when you press W, I hate the passive circle on the True Damage skin, and the Crime City skin, I really dislike the aesthetic of it, but it's relatively smooth, so you can definitely pick it up as well. So these skins, they feel smooth, yet they are not in the A tier just because of my personal preference. But that's all I want to say about the skin, so if you pick up one of these 3 skins, or if you pick skins up from the A tier and above, you are going to have smooth skins, so I would definitely recommend any of those. Now, we finally come to the end of this guide. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as that helps me out a lot. Also, if you're still watching, you're just an absolute legend. So thank you for watching this, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. And if you have any recommendations for a new guide, let them know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.